Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Vibha Hetu. I am an assistant professor at OP Jindal Global University. I am also an assistant director, Center for Victimology and Psychological Studies. I am going to speak on a module, victim-offender relationship. The learning outcomes for this module are to make the learners understand the relationship and interaction between victim and the offender, and also the empirical data to understand its role in criminal event. To acquaint the learners with the perspective of the victim, how relationship impact the victim and its influence in the behavior and psychological being of the victim. To make the learners understand how relationship between the victim and the offender affect the reporting of the crime and its conviction. Victim-offender relationship is very, very important to understand why there was particular crime committed against a particular victim. It's very important to understand that the offender chooses only a particular victim and for committing a crime. They cannot be any other victim in exchange to that victim. They have a reason for choosing such a victim. According to Hans von Henting and Mendelssohn, those who have spoken about the relationship of the offender with the victim, Hans von Henting has spoken about doer-sufferer relationship, where he has spoken about that offender and victim are somewhere connected by crime and the situation of crime. That at certain space and time, the victim and offender meets, and that is how the crime is committed. Whereas Mendelssohn talks about the penal couple. Penal couple means the offender and the victim. Once the crime has been committed, the person who has committed the offense, he is defined as an offender, and the person who has been victimized as a result of that crime is a victim. The criminal justice system demarcates a difference between the offender and the victim, and both compete for the interest of getting a justice in the criminal justice system. The relationship is very important even from the point of view of a criminal justice system. It all depends how the police looks at the relationship between the victim and the offender and decides whether they are reporting of criming or no criming. Criming means where the police thinks of the case that yes, crime has happened and there is a proper evidence and witness testimony to prosecute the case. So, the police will decide to go for a criming. No criming means that the police may decide there is a less of evidence. There is a likelihood that victim also may back out later on in the later stage of development in the case. In that case, the police may decide why to waste time. So, they may not even investigate the case and they may try to refute the victim or they may try to dismiss the case as it is not a proper authentic case which does not hold a strong stand. When we talk about what is the relationship between the victim and offender, in most offenses, victim is well known to the offender. They are well associated with the offender. They have known the offender in terms of relatives. They have been sharing a relationship with the victim for a long time. For example, when it comes to rape, maximum rape victims have well known the offender, and there lies the problem. They feel so let down by such offenders, those who have been well known to them. They are the ones who have actually taken the advantage of such victims. Then when it comes to domestic violence, there are so many victims of domestic violence that they outnumber other victims, whether of a property crime or of rape and even crimes of homicide. Victim and offender are known to associate with each other, and because of the proximity and because of certain development of a problematic situations that ultimately is resulted into a crime. The victims actually, the victimization act comes into being through needs, urges and drives. Needs are that where the crime happens because of the necessities. Urges is that there is a strong impulse to commit crimes. The drives means that it's a biological urge to commit a crime. It emerges from contacts, communications, interactions, attitudes and counter attitudes. The victims come into a physical contact with the offender. There is some exchange of information where the victim actually passes down such information to the offender. Now, for example, information can also be through a body language, where the victim actually uh, is perceived to be vulnerable by the offender, and the offender decides to take advantage. Interaction is, it's a both the way both the parties interact with each other, and then the offender decides to take advantage. Attitude is some subtle way of thinking or thoughts. So, because of that attitude, where some victims perceive themselves to be very vulnerable, they have a very negative outlook towards life, very negative attitude, because of which they are likely to be victimized very often. And counter attitudes, how those attitudes are countered and making good use of by the offender. It talks about that in most instances, victims are not chosen at random, and in many cases, the motives for the criminal act develop around a specific and non-exchangeable victim. The criminal targets a specific victim, and he will not substitute that victim with a victim's kin or kith or just anybody. Now, for example, somebody who has a jealousy, who has an unwarranted jealousy towards the other person, because the other person is progressing a lot, and this person who has been working actually very hard, I mean, he thinks of himself thinks of himself as a hard working person and still does not make any progress, he may suffer from an unwarranted jealousy towards the other person, and one day he decides to take a revenge, or to teach him a lesson, so that the other person will not progress that much. Victims and offenders relationship also becomes important in terms of the brutality of the crime, and also the further consequences of the crime on the victim as well as on the offender and their family, and the future developments in the crime event. For example, when we talk about domestic violence cases, we know in domestic violence cases, victim and the offender have been well associated with each other. They have known each other for a long time. The offender very well can identify with the victim's weaknesses as well as strength. And when it comes to weaknesses, the offender may make good use of the weaknesses of the victim. Domestic assault under domestic sphere is very common. There is another reason why it is very common, is because offender have easy access to such victims. Second, it happens in a private sphere of a house. It is away from the public realm. So, the offender gets more advantage towards the victim in terms of taking advantage of the victim. The victim cannot avoid such situations. The victim is because always under the guidance of the offender. There are three phases in domestic violence. First is tension building phase, second is acute battering phase, and third is honeymoon phase. In tension building phase, the offender actually tries to blend with the victim, and the victim also does the same equally. But after a certain point of time, the offender finds it very difficult to associate with the victim, and it starts throwing tantrums here and there, and also to an extent harms the victim. The crime is usually an unpleasant experience for the victim. Nobody would like to be victimized as a result of crime, because it's an unpleasant experience. There's loss of something. It can be a physical impact, psychological impact. It can also lead to a financial impact. The victim tends to suffer as a result of the crime, and at times the words of the victim are not validated. The victim, knowing very well that he or she had no role in the commission of crime, it becomes very difficult for the victim to explain her innocence or his innocence to the other person, because the other party may have some preconceived notion about the victim and also about the crime. In that case, the victim's words are not validated, her story is not believed. The victim also may feel that they are not vindicated, that other people, they don't believe their story, and they may try to actually find faults with the victim in order to blame the victim for having a role in the contribution of crime. In that case, they try to put the onus of responsibility for the commission of crime on the shoulders of victim, and in the same manner they try to take away the responsibility from the offender. That way they exonerate the offender and they blame the victim for the commission of crime. Victim feels very let down by such an attitude of the people around them. Victim is blamed for having a relationship, for having sharing a relationship with the offender, for having known the offender, And people see it that way, that they should have averted a crime by actually have anticipated that such thing might happen, and also they might have prevented it by not associating with such offenders. Crimes are not called for. Victims cannot be prepared for what crimes is going to take place with them. And especially in most crimes, victims are well known to the offender. The offender are known to the victim in terms of the relationship they share. It becomes very, very difficult to actually reach the to talk about how the crime could have been prevented, where the known people actually turned culprits one night and they try to harm the victim. The motivation and intention, in order to get the whole picture of a crime, we have to construct the whole picture of a crime by actually getting by actually getting to know the story from the offender as well as from the victim. Thereafter, the whole crime story can be constructed in order to understand the impact of the crime for the victim and the motive and the intention behind committing a crime from the offender. Victim and offender relationship is also important for understanding police and court decisions to apprehend and punish offenders. Like all social behavior, the crime event is also surrounded by history and an environment which alter victim, offender and future event. Now, for example, violent crimes which are of interpersonal nature, police do not take these crimes seriously and brush it off as a family matter because it happens in a private sphere. In domestic violence cases, since maximum crimes are limited to the private sphere, in fact, sometimes they are more symbolic in nature rather than related to the surroundings, because the offender may convey their threats, convey their violent behavior even through body language, and it is well received by the victim. The victim alone knows what the victim has been suffering from. It becomes very, very difficult even for police to apprehend such crimes, to understand the impact of such crimes on the victims, where the victim has been a victim of crime for more than 13 years or 14 years, and they have decided to keep themselves quiet. There is a reason behind that. A victim, once they have been victimized as a result of a crime, they become so subservient as submissive to the violent act of the offender that they find it difficult to react to the violence of the criminals. Once they may react, twice they may react, but ultimately their whole consciousness has been overtly impacted by the offender, and offender has taken a complete control of the consciousness of the victim. So even victim, they might come into a contact with their relatives who might be sympathetic to them, who might be loyal to them, who might be loving to them. Victim still finds it very difficult to divulge such secrets to their family members. There is another reason why that women from South Asian continent, they don't share the victimization impact to the other party. There is a reason behind that the onus of honor or izzat lies on the shoulders of the woman. So they are forced to keep it quiet. Why? Because it may reporting such a case may bring dishonor or disreputation to the family. So they are forced to keep and maintain the reputation of the family. They are not supposed to discuss such things in the public realm or ever report it to the police. If they at all do it, they are likely to bring about detrimental effect on themselves by even getting killed or even being disowned by their own community. South Asian women, there are three reasons for which by which they do not feel like reporting the case to the police. First, they feel let down by their own male members, because the male members, those who have been associated with them, have been well related to them, have been sharing a good rapport with them for a long time, all of a sudden starts becoming violent towards them, and starts committing a very derogatory act against them. They don't believe, it takes them very difficult to believe that once these men who were very loving to them all of a sudden has turned enemy to them. The second reason why they don't they don't report such crimes to the police, because they don't believe that such crimes are serious enough to constitute a crime. So they don't go to the police. They think that the crime was of a trivial nature and the police might not take them seriously. The third reason, that criminal justice system may not take interest in such cases, may not believe the victim. Why? Because there is a lack of evidence and witness testimony in such crimes. Even people do not perceive the victims to be innocent. There is a reason why, because they feel that after all it's the husband, and the victim never ever spoke about such a violence ever before. That means she might be making up a story. There's another reason why there are some victims, if they think about reporting a crime after 13 years and they have already been victimized and they have been a victim of continuum of violence, but people fail to understand why she did not report earlier. They fail to understand that they were caught in such a situation that they could not have escaped from such a situation. More so if the children are also involved, it becomes far more difficult for a victim to come out of that crime cycle. There's another reason why that victims do not want to break away from such a family. Reason why? Because husbands, they don't want to lose their control over the victim. Husbands, those who have been highly impacted by the patriarchal norms, they find it very difficult to let go of the woman even though they have sought a divorce, even though such victims have sought a divorce from their husband. They follow them, and sometimes because of the unwarranted jealousy they suffer towards their partners, that they go to the extent of killing their partner as well as the man the victims might be wanting to associate with. In apparent contrast to assaults involving intimates, assaults involving strangers focus on distance and the means by which distance is to be maintained. In the public sphere, there are rules of behavior that guide interaction and serve to keep individuals apart from each other. Loveland suggests that there are three broad interactional principles or rules of life in the public realm. The first is civil inattention, which is defined by Goffman as giving one another enough visual notice to demonstrate that one appreciates that the other is present, while at the next moment withdrawing one's attention from him so as to express that he does not constitute a target of special curiosity or design. Audience role prominence, the second principle, is the requirement that inhabitants of public settings act primarily as audience to the activities which surround them. Finally, civility towards diversity requires that face-to-face exchanges are conducted in a civil manner and attention is not drawn to features that may be deemed as offensive. Stranger assaults therefore deal with personal freedom and the negotiation of the rules associated with the public realm and maintaining maximum distance between individuals. Assaults between strangers tend to occur in particular public settings and emphasize the transgression of rules associated with these places. For example, a number of assaults occurring between strangers took place in bars and on the end of road. Each of these contexts has an associated set of rules which the other party perceived the other to have transgressed. Context associated with stranger assaults emphasizing personal freedom includes bar, roads, property and sex. At the same time as certain criminological theories such as routine activities and lifestyles would predict a greater threat to males exist in the public realm. Males have traditionally had far greater access to the public realm than females, and these suggest that males are more likely to be assaulted in this realm than are females. Unlike the assaults occurring in the realm of private relationships, however, physical location plays a greater role in assaults occurring between strangers. Intimates tend to assault each other primarily within the physical context of the home, but the contexts of intimate assault are not location specific, but are rather more related to the symbolic realm. Assault between strangers is determined to be a far greater extent by the opportunity associated with particular public venues, bars, the street, shopping malls, etc., than assaults between intimates. The boundaries of activity associated with and between strangers are more clearly demarcated than the boundaries between intimates. Activity between strangers is more temporally proximate, although we may have certain identity. Then comes a male rape. In male rape, it has been seen that males also have been known to be raped by somebody known to them, somebody who was in the position of trust, who were in the position of seniority, and who were in the position of care and protection. They are the ones who had taken advantage. The methods of approaching a male rape victim is different to the methods adopted for approaching a female victims of crime, female victims of rape crime. The methods by which these male children are victimized, they are approached in a way that they are groomed to believe that it's a play game thing and they will enjoy the game. So they indulge into that without having a written realization that they are being taken advantage of sexually. They don't oppose the act because after all it's somebody who has been in the relationship with the victim is the one who is actually taking advantage of. They are well known to each other. In the female rape crime, it has been seen that mostly it's the neighbors, it's the relatives, it's the people those who are well acquainted with the victim in the form of a friend, in the form of relatives, and also in the form of neighbors. They are the ones who have taken advantage of such victims. There have been total number of 674 incest rape cases. Incest rape cases where marriages are not bound to happen according to social norms. Even in such cases, there are men who are found to take advantage of such little females. In terms of relatives, near relatives and far relatives are also known to take advantage of many victims. Such victims are vulnerable because of their age, because of their gender, because of their area of residence, and also because of their less understanding of such criminal acts. Feminist writers have argued that the prevalence of sexual violence contributes to gender inequality and supports the status quo of male dominance by keeping all women, including those women who are not directly victimized, in a state of constant fear. The fear of rape is a daily reality for many women, limiting their freedom of expression, their movement, reducing their quality of life, as is confirmed by empirical research. The meaning of rape for women often concerns their relationship with the perpetrator. Most women are raped by acquaintances, friends, relatives, etc., but are few women who are raped by strangers, as shown by the data on rape in India. Out of 37,413 rape cases, in 32,187 cases, the offenders were known to the victims, accounting for 86% of total rape cases during 2014. 16 of the UTC have reported more rape cases than all other states, accounting for 90% of the total rape cases. From 674 incest rape cases, in 966 cases, victims were raped by close family members, and in 2,217 cases, victims were raped by her relatives. A total number of 8,344 cases were reported in which victims were raped by her neighbors. Maximum such cases were reported in Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan and Maharashtra, and these four states accounted for alone 48.4% of total such cases. In 618 cases, employers, co-workers have raped their female employees or colleagues. So, this talks about that the female victims most often know their male assailants. In fact, British Crime Survey also have found the same results, which is similar to the statistics collected by National Crime Records Bureau, where very few people, very few strangers actually make up of the whole criminals who have committed a rape crime against the known victim, whereas most offenders are well known to the victims. The Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which came into effect in 2012, broadened the definition of rape by including non-consensual penetration of the anus and other orifices, by recognizing that the victim of rape could also be either male. It accordingly became possible to prosecute male rape as such rather than as indecent assault, which had hitherto been the only available charge, and hence to give voice to the experiences of a group of victims that has almost been totally ignored. Whilst consensual sex between a male child and an older woman may not be regarded by many as sexual exploitation, such interaction may cause later social and psychological problems, and does raise the issue of female involvement in sexual exploitation. Male rape is predominantly perpetrated by heterosexual men, and it has been argued is not motivated by sexual gratification, but like female rape is motivated by power and control and enhancement of masculinity. In other respects, the experiences of male rape differ from those of female counterparts. The meaning of rape for women often concerns their relationship with the perpetrator. As was indicated above, the most women are raped by acquaintances. For men, however, the method is more important because of the effect it has on their social identity and autonomy. Male rape poses a great challenge to masculine ideas of power and control. Conclusion is that many crimes occur due to a certain relationship that exists between the people. Relationships are known to influence the many facets of the crime and its likely consequences for further aggravating the relationship between the victim and the offender. Maximum crimes are known to be of an interpersonal nature. Victims, those who had earlier shared a very strong relationship with the victim, and there was also a history of violence in that relationship. Such victims, once they break away from the offender, they would not like to associate it with such offenders. Interaction is very, very important in the relationship of the victim and offender. That may sometimes aggravate the offense, and sometimes they also may avert the crime. There is also an example where there was a victim who was picked up by four men, and the victim was taken to a isolated location by four men. The victim was in a shock, so she did not react while she was being driven to an isolated place, and these four men were laughing at her. The victim was a school going child, and during that time she was actually returning from her tuition classes. When these four men brought her to an isolated place, they started having a drink and they started cracking jokes with her. And they told her, "Don't worry, why are you so sad? We are anyway going to enjoy." And they started talking in a very filthy language. The victim, somehow she came into a little consciousness, and she started crying. She just spoke two words. She said, "I don't know, every day I come at this time to my house, I return to my house at this time from tuition classes. My mother must be waiting and she must be so worried." That's the only line that she spoke, and this shook the consciousness of the men around her. And what they decided was something which is unexpected. They picked up the girl, they put her in the car, and they dropped her back from where the girl was picked up. So that is why interaction also becomes very, very important, especially when it comes to stranger assault and also in domestic assault. In stranger assault, we have seen that the victim, there is some transgression of rules in a public realm which may provoke the person to commit a crime or take an aggressive step towards the victim. Otherwise, if there is a glance of exchanges, there is a glance or exchange between the victim and the offender where they appreciate each other's presence, so that is fine. But if at all there is a unnecessary exchange of glances, then unnecessary focus on certain parts of the victim which may make the victim offend, and the other party may decide to take an advantage of the situation where they might be an isolated place, the victim might be vulnerable. Crime events also have revealed that there is a close proximity between the two most important stakeholders who give rise to its occurrence. The relationship helps gain deeper insight into the dynamics such as interaction, communication, and attitudes between the victim and the offender at the time of crime, and how it would be looked at by police and other criminal justice functionaries. For example, in a stranger assault, the victim is more likely to be believed than in a domestic assault. There is another reason for doing so, because in stranger assault, police have a very strongly belief that victim has not contributed. In certain in a domestic sphere, when the crime has been committed by a well-known offender towards a well-known victim, the police might be apprehensive that what if the victim also might have acted inappropriately. That means they also have this blame attitude, blame game attitude towards the victim. It also matters where people are closely related to each other than our involvement of a stranger. That means it also becomes very difficult for a police to understand if the victim has been victimized for a very, very long time as to what might have been the consequences of the crime. This would further entails whether interaction and communication will have favorable impact on the police in reporting the case and the public prosecutor willing to go ahead with the case in the court. For example, in court we have seen that the cases are compete on the basis of certain criteria. If those certain criteria are not fulfilled by the domestic violence cases, those domestic violence cases would be simply dismissed. If the court finds sufficient evidence or not, as such, crimes involving close relationship are known to take place in private sphere where it would be impossible to have any witness testifying against such crime, then it becomes very difficult to prosecute such crimes in the court. The criminal justice system also have to be sensitized towards this aspect, that crimes are bound to occur more so when there is a strong relationship between the victim and the offender. under domestic sphere, and it should not be dismissed as a crime of a trivial nature or private affair or family affair. Such crimes are also to be taken equally seriously as other crimes, and systems should not just balance the criminal act on evidences, but should also look into the crucial communication and interaction that take place between the offender and the victim.